is Dan Meyer with RCR Wireless News. Thanks for joining us today. Today we're going to speak with Dan Hayes from PwC about the upcoming Mobile World Congress event. Also talking with Oracle about their views on NFV. So please stay with us for the NFV SDN reality check.
Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board. telecomcareers.com.
Hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Dan Meyer. I'm the editor-in-chief of RCR Wireless News. Thanks for joining us today on this week's NFV SDN reality check. This week we are joined by Dan Hayes remotely from PwC. Dan is the Principal and U.S. Mobile Services Advisory Leader, one of the longest titles I've seen in a while for PwC. Hey, Dan, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Dan. It's great to be here.
Great. Well, obviously, so we're leading up to some exciting times next week in the mobile space with the Mobile World Congress event in Barcelona, Spain. I know you're going to be heading to that show this year. Luckily, I'm avoiding the event this year. I won't talk too much about that. But what I want to do is, I guess, touch a little bit on, maybe what we might see from the virtualization space when it comes to the event. Obviously, the telecom market, has really seen a lot of excitement and a lot of news recently about the virtualization space. And it seems like next week's event is going to have quite a bit of news along those lines as well. So I don't know, maybe start off with, I guess your general views of what you've seen when it comes to kind of this new network evolution, this virtualization market that's kind of crept up over the past 12 to 18 months. Maybe what you've seen in that market and maybe what you might expect to come from the show next week.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think Mobile World Congress is going to be a really exciting time again this year, and we definitely expect that NFV and SDN are going to be two of the hot topics, among the participants there. Probably a lot of really good, demonstrations and announcements of new technologies. So it's going to be a great time for this. From our perspective, this technology really is the next logical step in the whole evolution of mobile. In that, if you look back at what's happened in computing and what computing has done with infrastructure and how virtualization has benefited, cost and efficiency in that space, you can expect to see the same things happening here. And, there's a lot of high expectations. And I think, nothing ever seems to go in the wireless industry quite as fast as it's originally intended. But, we think that we're starting to see some people dip their toes in the water and start to really look at, what can be done with this new technology.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, obviously, it does seem like, again, over the past 12 to 18 months, this virtualization, NFV, SDN, all these acronyms have really crept up, at least in the telecom world. I mean, obviously, these have been, long-time technologies in the IT space and the computing space. But yeah, for telecom operators, it is a new technology. And like you said, there is a lot of excitement around it, but there is also, I guess, that like you said, telecom has always had issues when new things come out. They always take a lot longer than you expect them to take. And so this is one of those technologies that it can go very deep into the network. And so it's one of those altering kind of technologies that, if it's not done correctly, can really impact how operators are operating their networks and impact service levels and things like that. So it seems like it's one of those technologies that really needs to be worked out before it can be deployed. So it does seem like we're still kind of in that phase, perhaps, where we're still trying to look through or work through kind of the challenges in terms of kind of this new virtualization move.
Yeah, well, I mean, the reality is that we're going from a paradigm of custom hardware, heavy systems integration for the operators, to a vision for where NFV and SDN really are going to allow operators to be less about hardware and systems integration and more about managing the evolution of the platform. Now, it's a great aspirational sort of view. But the reality is we've got a long way to go to get there in terms of interoperability and standards and capabilities in this space. So right now, as we're seeing the technology being worked on, the question that we at PwC are getting asked a lot is, so what's the business case? How do we make this work? And what should we be looking for in terms of the operating model to actually implement this? Because no one does these things just for the sake of a new technology, right? They're all doing it to provide a higher level of customer service and lower costs, and that's really the goal. So that's what we're hearing a lot from our clients, and I have to say, we're hearing it on the wireless side. We're also hearing it on the wireline side too. A lot of interest in this topic.
I mean, I guess, are you able to provide an answer at this point? Because it does seem like, I just did a report on this, and that was one of the topics that was brought up was there's still this ROI that needs to be kind of worked out with this because again, this is going to cost. This is a pretty significant investment for operators. And again, like you said, I mean, they're going to look for a return on this. I mean, they're not going to do this just for the sake of doing it. They're going to want to see down the road at least some sort of return on their investment. Uh, I guess is there a model yet that's been put out there that actually shows perhaps a timeline or a time frame where this will actually pay off for telecom operators?
Yeah, I think it's very early days for that. The business case really is going to depend upon the situation that you have with operators, right? For a greenfield operator, if there are any of those left in the world, there's definitely going to be a logical business case for NFV and SDN because it's going to be the way of the future, and it's going to get them started on the right foot. For an incumbent operator, it's probably going to be one of those answers of it depends.
Yeah.
And it's going to depend a lot on how it's deployed in their network, where it's deployed in their network, and the timing of what happens with it. So, for example, if you have an NFV implementation that takes place with let's say within just the core of the network, well, that may be a lot more simple than if you're doing RAN virtualization
Yeah.
and you're now relying upon making sure you've got fiber backhaul to each and every cell site, and you're going to now centralize that. That has a whole different operating model tied up to it, and you really have to think about how you deploy that. Do you do it with the next generation of radio technology? Do you do it on a geographic basis, or even within like a metro area? Do you maybe do it in just the core where you have a strong fiber backhaul capability, and perhaps the pieces where you don't have that kind of backhaul, you can't go on to a virtualization strategy just yet. So it's going to really depend upon the operational strategy and the business strategy to go behind it. So lots of factors, lots of tough decisions, and that's what our clients are talking to us about right now.
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, it does seem like, I guess, with a company like AT&T, for instance, that came out late last year announcing their plans to really push virtualization across their organization, really. But their time frame, that was a 2020 time frame, which kind of shows you, and that's 5 years down the road, and they're probably one of the more, really, it seems more advanced companies or operators when it comes to actually rolling out virtualization. So they're still looking at least a 5 year time frame here. So, like you said, it does seem like it's still, early days here. I mean, again, the standards issue is a huge problem. I mean, there's still this interoperability issue we're working through. And again, like you said, the greenfield, brownfield type of deployment. I mean, these operators have spent hundreds of billions of dollars on equipment that's working, for the most
Absolutely.
part. I mean, maybe not the most efficient, but it's working pretty well. And to all of a sudden, make all this stuff or kind of turn this stuff over to a virtualized platform, that's going to take a long time and a lot of support. And yeah, it does seem like we're kind of in an odd space here when it comes to this, because again, there is a lot of momentum here, but there's still so many questions that have to be answered. I'm guessing, next week at the show, I don't know if those questions will be answered. I'm sure there'll probably just be more questions afterwards, but it definitely at least shows that the industry is really pushing. It seems pretty hard, at least towards this space, and a lot of support there, at least from the operators, from the vendors, behind getting behind virtualization.
Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways you can look back a couple of years to the topic of small cells
Yeah,
and what happened with that. And, small cells as a technology has been very proven, very strong
yeah,
technical case for making it work, strong impact to the customer experience. The challenge with small cells, which I think is going to be the same challenge for NFV and SDN, is really about the operating model for it. So, for example, with NFV, look at the impact of facilities. Well, if I'm going to have all of this stuff centralized and virtualized, what does it mean in terms of space and power and HVAC? What does it mean for critical things like business continuity and disaster recovery, right? I mean, today, if you have one site that gets wiped out, one cell site, okay, yeah, so you have maybe a kilometer or two that doesn't have coverage, and oftentimes the rest of the network can pick up a portion of that, and
yeah.
it's not a big deal. But if you now have all of this pooled together for an entire metro area, let's say, and you somehow have a disaster at that facility, well, that's a whole different situation. You could be talking about millions of subscribers that have an issue. So lots of things for people to think about that are not just all about cost savings. They're just about the operating model for how you actually deploy this.
Yeah, that's a good point. And obviously, it's always great to talk to you about that because you do seem to always bring up those kind of smaller issues that are huge if you think about it. I mean, again, like you said, I mean, if one, this is all centralized in some at some facility somewhere, and something happens, the power goes out, or and there's battery backup, obviously. But if something happens there, again, it wipes out a big part of your network, as opposed to, like you said, if a cell site goes down, that's just one little part. But yeah, I mean, those are great, huge issues that need to be obviously resolved, because operators are always under the gun when it comes to making sure that their networks are always up. I mean, they've got these 5.9 requirements, SLAs with their enterprise customers. I mean, these are things that they can't just go back and kind of alter. I mean, these are things that are kind of set in stone. So if this stuff is not working correctly, that's a huge issue for these operators moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, and these are the things that worry the operators that we work with, right? They think about this stuff, and many of them have gotten really good at dealing with fault tolerance within the networks and disaster recovery. But when you get a new model and when you've got an entire new set of platforms, you really have to step back and look at those things. The other thing that we're hearing a lot about is, well, what's the impact to this? If there's some cost savings from an operational standpoint, where does it come from, right? Is it power? Is it capex? Is it headcount? I mean, if you're centralizing this stuff, well, maybe you have an opportunity to save on maintenance. You don't have to go out and visit the sites as often. You got all the gear in one place. Those are all really big issues. Um, we'll see how that happens.
Yeah.
And to your point about timelines, 5 years may not be that unreasonable to get all of this stuff worked out, and particularly when you have to coordinate it with new spectrum purchases or new generations of network equipment. It's a lot to keep in mind as you go down the NFV path.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously, and you mentioned like I guess that cost saving issue. I mean, that was one thing that was kind of brought up too when I was talking to some people on the topic. Was that seems to be maybe kind of the dark secret of all this is the actual cost savings is probably going to come from headcount. I mean, that's kind of what we're looking at. I mean, obviously, this is going to alter the way operators run their corporations, and I'm guessing they're hoping to perhaps maybe cut down on the number of people who are required to kind of run these services. And so that's always kind of a sticky situation, or tough topic to discuss. But it does seem like that's going to be maybe one of those areas where there are some cost savings. Obviously, there's building issues that come along with that as well too. But that does seem to be kind of maybe one of those areas where the cost savings will come from this move towards virtualization. But again, we'll see how that plays out too. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, when you look back again at the enterprise space and what's happened with data centers, I think you can project a lot of the things that
yeah,
they've gone through onto the NFV and SDN space. You know, power and space have been one sort of category of savings. People have been another one, but even things like utilization of capacity. Today when you're doing capacity planning within a mobile network, because the capacity is so distributed, you're typically left with a lot of idle capacity at any given time of day, and that's just because, well, maybe people commute and they're not in their
yeah,
residential area at one time, and then they're over at the over in the city center at another time of day, and the same capacity is not being used for all of that. Well, if you can start to tighten that up, much like we did in virtualizing enterprise environments, then you can get some big savings out of that. Down the road at what that means for the providers of that equipment and that capacity too, because it may well mean that there's some pressure on the volume of sales that they have as well.
yeah, yeah. It's gonna be interesting to look for. Well, obviously, again, the show next week, I'm sure we'll have a lot of big news coming out in terms of virtualization. I know I'm already getting tons of news items from companies and not pre-announcing things when it comes to virtualization at the show. Obviously, you're going to be there in force as well too. I'm sure you'll see a lot of that. But again, I'm sure it'll be a big event for everything. Again, this is one of the yearly big show for the mobile, at least for the mobile focused telecom industry.
Yeah.
So there'll be a lot of big news coming from that. It's kind of a nice, almost like a CES with a bit of a European flair to it. So it'll be a good event, I'm sure. So, well, Dan, hey, we definitely appreciate the great insight today on this. I'm sure we'll be talking with you at the event and also after the event as well to get some more insight on what happened at the show. But we definitely appreciate the time today on this, and safe travels to Barcelona. And hopefully we'll catch up again soon on this.
That's great. Thanks so much, Dan.
All right, we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks. All right. So, hey, again, thanks to Dan Hazer for joining us on this topic. Obviously, Mobile World Congress next week is going to be a big show. Well, also taking a look at, one of the large players in the virtualization space is Oracle. Oracle Communications has a long history in computing and the networking space, and also working with a lot of telecom operators in terms of strategizing their virtualization needs. We recently spoke with Oracle about their network service orchestration solution, which is a new product they have coming out to help operators with the important aspect of orchestration when it comes to handling their telecom network. Uh, so we talked with them recently about the topic there. I talked with Barry Hill, who's the global head of NFV at Oracle, to discuss how the company views new entrants into the NFV space, the growing importance of active orchestration, and the move towards what he termed NFV 2.0, and the industry heading towards the next evolution of NFV. I think we have a video clip of that coming up now.
Who are coming at this from the network perspective only.
Yeah.
And they have been in the business of activating their elements in the past. Now they're looking to activate, alternate third-party elements as well. And we are in that space as well. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing, though, is that we believe as we move this business forward into what I kind of term, NFV 2.0, we have to become a lot more efficient in how we go and do this orchestration. It needs to be what I call active orchestration. For that, you need two other aspects of technology to what I call kind of bookend this functional NFV diagram and the orchestration. One of those is you need a very, very powerful analytics platform from which you can capture, correlate, and define outcomes based on information you're collecting. Okay, as you can appreciate, Oracle, this is really core to our business. The other thing is that once you get information that you want to change in the network, the last thing you want to do is just feed it back into an orchestrator and have the network changing, because then you have anarchy. What you want to do is you need to feed it into some form of policy engine recommendation environment where the operator can put their company's rules and regulations of what can and cannot happen in the network. And if the recommendation fits within certain guidelines, then you present it to the orchestrator. Then you can allow the network to change and adapt to the changing conditions with limited operational intervention. And there's an initiative that Oracle are very aggressively supporting. It's been driven out of the Telemanagement Forum called Zoom. Have you heard of Zoom?
Yes, indeed, yes. But yeah, maybe for those who don't, maybe a little background on that too, for just
sure. Zoom is an initiative, an industry initiative that we've been a big part of driving, which stands for Zero Touch Orchestration and Operations Management. What have we got to do as an industry to remove cost and operational infrastructure cost for changing and bringing new services to light and altering and administering the network? Orchestration, automated orchestration or active orchestration is a big part of what we are thinking about, more than just being able to plug a number of virtual network functions or physical network functions together, pressing a button, activating them, and moving a packet or a session between them. And that's like, okay, that's a start, but it's one dollar. So then the 2.0, as I mentioned, is the idea of taking Oracle's strength and assets in bookending with analytics and policy. But there is also a 3.0 that we see that we're really heading towards in our vision, and that is real change, Dan, I think will only occur in this industry when we start linking the benefits of virtualization in the network with what we're doing in the business. Okay? So business orchestration linked to network orchestration allows you to have the business to drive the network, not the network driving what you can do in your business. And if we get that right, Dan, then we have the opportunity to really fundamentally transform this industry rather than just making a network a little more efficient.
Interesting. Well, I guess then looking at that, I mean, how far do you think we're along in that process? Because it is, obviously in the telecom space, traditional operators are very, kind of stodgy perhaps in kind of their evolution of new technologies. I mean, they're a little conservative. And this is a wholesale changing of their operations, really. I mean, obviously the network side is big, but also from the business side. I know AT&T, when they announced their plans last year, they kind of said that this is real. It's a business changing move. Does it seem like that the market is prepared for that? How prepared is the market for that? I guess for that move.
Yeah. So like you, I've been in this business a long time, right? And we worry about the speed from which it moves. However, let me just remind you that it was only 2.5 years ago now that actually the carriers got together, not the vendors. The carriers got together in Germany and said, we have to do something different. And they created the white paper in October 2012, which described the vision of moving to a more virtualized functional model in the network, okay? It's only 2.5 years ago, and it's taken the industry by storm. So is it moving fast? Absolutely, okay? And we're, as an industry, learning a lot from the world of IT and cloud and open source and these sorts of tools, open APIs, RESTful APIs, and these sorts of capabilities that really weren't even in the language of carriers, network folks in the past. So are we getting there? Absolutely. Are we moving fast? Yes. Are there trials, and proof of concepts going on and have been going on for the last 2.5 years? Yes, they have. Okay, so it is happening. I would submit to you that in what I call business orchestration or north-south orchestration, from the user coming in through a self-serve portal, creating their own bundled services, getting credit acceptance and checking, and activating their own servers with zero touch. This is an effort that has been going on for some time, and Oracle are actively engaged in deploying business orchestration in carriers' networks already. The issue is, as an industry here, when that business orchestration hits the network orchestration, it can't go clang, okay?
Sure.
It has to be aligned, and that intersection is what we kind of, internally here call a differential, like in a car, okay? Where you have the pistons going up and down, and you have to transfer the energy to forward and backward motion. It's kind of like that, where we have to understand the data model. We have to understand the service description languages we use. We have to understand how to activate different devices that speak different languages. We have to understand how to translate things like SID into common description, where the network guys may use, Tosca or Yang or some network-based languages or descriptions of what things are. And we're heavily involved in working on helping the industry solve that problem through work that we're doing in Telemanagement Forum and work that we're doing on the ETSI NFV working groups on getting that right. Because only then does that allow us to really, change.
Well, it's a good point, because, it does seem like that, it has moved relatively quickly, but it does seem like that perhaps we are running up against perhaps a standards issue. Obviously, ETSI's working aggressively on this. They finished up phase 1, working on phase 2 now. There are a lot of new organizations that have popped up over the past 12 months, OpenNFV and OpenStat, Open Daylight, various ones like that, who are doing different parts of the puzzle too. But are we hitting an issue where, obviously standards take a lot of time? There's a lot of people involved in the standards process, and so everybody has to put their 2 cents in there. But is that process perhaps slowing the evolution of NFV? And are we getting to a point where perhaps carriers might have to actually deploy some NFV solutions that perhaps aren't really to a standard yet, but could be in the future? I guess, how is the standards process holding or hindering this whole progress of NFV deployments?
Yeah, look, standards is an interesting discussion in its own right. We've got half an hour just on that.
True.
The world of cloud and IT isn't really designed the way that the world of telecom infrastructure has been in the past, where we had to have common protocols between certain nodes in the network. We had to have very clear definition of call paths and things like that. But and it is a blending. I'm not going to say you don't need standards, but we can't have standards drive our urgency to deliver these new, more effective ways of deploying network and services in your business. So it is a balance. Without standards, again, we have anarchy. But the benefit of open source and open standards and a new working group that starts seemingly every week is that we get, people putting their best ideas on the table to help make this work. What is required, though, Dan, I would submit to you, is that there needs to be at least some level of scale, meaning companies with some level of scale that can help quarterback the deployment of these new architectures and designs. Because, again, if you just take a lot of open source technology and plug it together with some small innovative applications and hope it's going to work is a stretch at best. Mm-hmm. So, I think NFV is kind of the best of all worlds, where it says, Etsy's not defining the standard. They're defining a functional framework of what we should be thinking about. The industry, the cloud industry, the open source industry is defining some standard interfaces and hypervisor technologies that we should be looking at using. Everyone can start working with those now. We understand the world of APIs on how to connect various disparate components together, I think, pretty well. I think that as long as the desire is there, we'll get there. And the fact that this is, again, a carrier-driven initiative, not a vendor-driven initiative, there is the desire to make this thing happen. And, there will be some companies that have a lot of assets to be the foundation to bring all of this stuff together. And there'll be some companies that will be, unique component providers to the mix. This is a huge transformation, and we see that as a great opportunity as well.
Yeah. I mean, so again, do you expect, I guess, kind of moving forward then over the next 12 months or so to see the same kind of, I don't want to say hype cycle, but I mean, 2014 was a pretty big year when it came to announcements. I mean, do you expect that same sort of momentum to continue into this year, or do you expect 2015 to be more of a year of, maybe more proof of concepts, more, really trying to make this stuff work on the ground level as opposed to a lot of announcements, a lot of partnerships, actually making the stuff work on the ground?
No, I think what you're going to see, Dan, towards the second half of this year is a lot more, let's call it relevant POCs and proof of concepts and trials, rather than can I take some software that's run on a proprietary ASIC and port it to Linux, run it under a virtual machine, stick it on an x86 box and see how it runs. I mean, that's fundamentals, and you've got to go through that process. I get it. Now we've got to start linking these, becoming more, driving the business opportunity and driving the automation and thinking about what we've got to do around zero-touch modeling, thinking, deployment. And you will start to see those. You will start to see some companies doing what I call a cap and grow, where they are setting up infrastructure kind of in parallel to their existing infrastructure and running certain services like machine-to-machine type services in a completely virtualized environment. And I think you'll see real revenue starting to flow from carriers, going into next year. We see that.
Interesting. I mean, there's been a lot of talk, about how deep can NFV really go into a network. I mean, obviously there's, like you were saying, there's some business aspects of it now that are already in play. But there's also been talk, at the other extreme of, you can pretty much virtualize everything in the network at some point, all the way down to the core if you wanted to. Or I guess maybe everything except for the antennas, perhaps. But I mean, at some point, how deep do you think virtualization can really go into a network and still be an effective, efficient model that can be managed by an operator?
All the way. I mean,
Okay.
Look, the train's left the station. If there's anybody out there who believes that this is not going to happen or is still questioning it, then good luck, but the train has left the station, okay? And if you're not on it, then you won't be a part of it going forward. And so can it be done all the way from the ground up? Absolutely. Absolutely. However, let's be smart about this. We've got an existing massive investment already in. Most companies that I'm engaged with are talking about starting to use virtualization as a next step for handling extra capacity.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at hybrid models for deploying both existing physical nodes with virtual nodes until maybe some of the technology gets to the point that it needs to be, so that we can completely transfer it into a virtualized model. There are some people, as I said, bypassing, doing an overlay network model to get this thing going. Is everything there right now? No. But the desire is there, and we will get there, and there is no turning back. Absolutely no turning back in my mind.
Great insight there from Oracle. That's, I believe it's Barry Hill, who's the head of NFV for Oracle. I'm sure they'll have some great insight also on the NFV space when it comes to the Mobile World Congress event next week there. So great insight there from Oracle. Well, again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Also, a special thanks to our guest, Dan Hayes, for joining us, for providing some great insight on the virtualization space and kind of look ahead to next week's Mobile World Congress event. And thanks again for all of you watching. And please make sure to check the NFV SDN reality check next week. Thanks.